In the last section, we finished an overview on actions and action creators. Remember, an action creator is just a function that returns an action, and an action is just an object that flows through all of our different reducers. Reducers can then use that action to produce a different value for its particular piece of state. Our goal here is to give our user the ability to click on a book and see a detail containing more information about it. Step number 1 in this process is to make sure that clicking on a book will actually trigger an action creator. So here's how we're going to make that happen. We're going to define an action creator, and we're going to make sure that we call it whenever a book title is clicked on. Makes sense, right? Let's start with creating the action creator first. In the actions folder, I'm going to open up index.js. And for right now, this is going to contain all the different action creators that we make. For now, we're going to create a single action creator called select book. An action creator is just a function, and we're going to call it select book. It's going to take as its only argument a book, which is an object with a title. For right now, we're just going to console log whatever gets passed in here. So we'll say a book has been selected, and we'll just console log the title. We're also going to make sure that we export this function, because obviously we want to make use of this action creator in other places inside of our application. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. So here's our action. We just need to be able to call it whenever a user actually clicks on a book. So you might think to yourself, okay, no problem. We're just going to import it into the book list component, and we're going to call it in a on-click handler. Unfortunately, not quite so simple. Right now, this is just a plain function, right? We need to make sure that the action that gets returned from it ends up running through all of our reducers. So we can't just call this function and expect that the action is going to show up in the right place, right? We have to actually make sure that this action creator is wired up to Redux. Do you remember when we were working on book list and we created a connection between book list and our state with this connect function right here? It turned book list from a component into a container. So we're going to further connect this component by binding the select book action to this book list component. We're going to throw down a little bit of code here and then walk through it. Trying to explain it beforehand is probably just going to be a little bit confusing, so let's just do some typing first, and then we'll talk about exactly what's going on. So at the top, we're first going to import the action creator, select book. Right now, we're in containers, so we're going to go up into actions and then get index. So we'll go up into actions and then get index, like so. Next, we're going to import a function called bind action creators from Redux. This is a function, this bind action creators right here, is what we're going to use to make sure that the action that is generated by the action creator actually ends up flowing through all the different reducers. So this is the part right here where we take that return value from select book and make sure that it actually flows through all the different reducers in our application. Next, at the bottom, we're going to define another function here called map dispatch to props. The first argument is going to be dispatch, and this is definitely where we're going into, let's write some code and then explain what's going on, so just bear with me for a second here. Inside of here, we're going to return bind action creators, and we're going to pass it an object with a key of select book and a value of select book. So in this case, this select book right here is the actual action creator that we imported at the top. Then the second argument after the object will be dispatch. Finally, at the bottom on the connect line here, we're going to add another argument, and it's going to be map dispatch to props, like so. Okay, so a lot of code in here. stuff like bind action creators is definitely, doesn't help explain what's going on at all. So let's walk through this by adding some comments to the code that we just wrote. So first, let's start inside of map dispatch to props. Whenever select book is called, the result should be passed to all of our reducers. That's what bind action creators is doing here with the dispatch right here. It's saying, okay, I understand that you're going to call select book. I understand this is an action creator that you're going to call at some point in time. Whenever it gets called, I want to make sure that the result of it flows through this dispatch function right here. And this dispatch function is what takes all these actions and it basically, it receives them kind of like a funnel, and it spits them back out to all the different reducers in our application. So again, bind action creators with dispatch says, all right, I'm going to take this stuff and I'm going to take all these actions, I'm going to make sure that they get passed on to all the different reducers inside the application. Next, the actual function map dispatch to props. Anything returned from this function will end up as props on the book list container. So notice how we specifically are passing an object with key select book and value select book. So just in the same way that map state to props worked, where whatever we returned ended up as props on our component, on our container, same exact thing for map dispatch to props. Whatever is returned from this function, but so in reality, whatever we pass here as a first argument is going to be available as props to our container. So now that we've defined this, inside of our container, we can call this.props.selectBook, specifically because this key right here. This is the magic right here. This.props.selectBook, and that will call our action creator. All right, there's one last piece in here that we got to explain. We're going to say, and we're going to kind of add a comment here that kind of also explains what's going on with map state to props. So we'll say promote book list from a component to a container. It needs to know about this new dispatch method select book. Make it available as a prop. Okay, so without a doubt, this is probably the most confusing code around in Redux. If you start working on your own project, I highly recommend you reference the React Redux documentation, as it gives a great guide of all the different ways that you can use connect here. And a great guide of all the different ways that you can take pieces of state or your different action creators that you define and make them available on your container. But what we've covered right here is probably the most generic and most widely used use case. The case in which we want to take some state and map it to the props of our container, and the case in which we want to take a action creator and make it available to be called inside of the container as well. One last, I just want to review this one more time because I feel like it's probably the biggest leap of faith here, is the action creator with this bind action creators and this dispatch method right here. Again, the purpose here is select book is a just totally plain function, nothing special about it, right? It returns a plain JavaScript object. If we just call it and we get the object back inside of our component, we'd be sitting there like, all right, I got this action, what in the world am I going to do with it? We have no idea what to do with it. The only part of our application that actually cares about that action is the reducers. So the purpose of bind action creators and dispatch is specifically to take what gets returned from select book and make sure that it flows through all the reducers. That's the purpose of bind action creators and dispatch. Now, if you're still confused on why we would want these actions to flow through the reducer at all, in the first place, we're going to cover that in the next section. So first, in the next section, we're going to make sure that book list can actually call this action creator select book here. So let's cover that in the next section.